Hi, I'm Kevin Bankston, at Kevin Bankston on the Twitters. I am the director of the Open Technology Institute in New America, which is a public interest internet policy shop working to ensure that everyone, including you, has access to an internet that's open and secure. Since you are here, both at South by Southwest and at Passcode's booth, by the way, thank you Passcode for having me, you're probably aware that there's some kind of argument going on about encryption right now. And I'm going to take a wild guess that you have some passing familiarity with this controversy, so I'm not going to belabor the background, but very briefly, back in fall of 2014, Apple announced and Google shortly followed, saying that they were going to turn on default full disk encryption on their phones, iPhones and on Google Android devices. The FBI director, the Manhattan DA, and several other law enforcement people proceeded to immediately freak out and say that the companies were enabling terrorists and child pornographers. They used the opportunity to raise their similar but distinct concerns about the use of end-to-end encryption products, messaging products like iMessage and now WhatsApp, which has moved to end-to-end encryption. And ever since then, the government and the tech companies have been in something of a cold war on this issue, a war that went hot last month in a court in San Bernardino, where the DOJ is trying to get the court to force Apple to develop new tools to circumvent the security on their iPhones in regard to an iPhone that was possessed by one of the San Bernardino shooters. Meanwhile, the New York Times just reported yesterday that the DOJ is contemplating a similar challenge when it comes to WhatsApp's end-to-end messaging. So that's the battlefield. My goal today with this very informal talk is to give you sort of a 30,000-foot view of what the top arguments are against the government undermining encryption, whether it's by trying to force companies not to deploy it, or trying to force them to put backdoors into it, or trying to force them to build new tools to circumvent it, like in the Apple case. But before we start, I'm curious, how many of you saw the president's comments on Friday about encryption? Yes, a number of you. As a pro-encryption advocate, I've been really pleased that the White House's official position is they are not pushing for legislation right now that would undermine encryption, and that's a great thing. At the same time, though, I was very disappointed by the president's comments here on Friday. And to boil down like 12 minutes of hemming and hawing, what he basically said was that people who are being absolutist on encryption need to compromise. And while he admitted that encryption is absolutely critical to our cybersecurity, and admitted that he was no technologist and had no idea how it might be done, he insisted that Silicon Valley needs to figure out somehow how to magically give us strongly encrypted products while also somehow ensuring that the government can always get access to that encrypted data when it needs it. So that's what the president wants. I want a gold-plated rocket pony. Both of us are going to end up disappointed, I expect, in the end. But in honor of the president's comments, you'll see I've retitled this talk. It was just to have top 10 reasons not to undermine crypto. Now it is top 10 reasons why you should be a crypto absolutist. So I'm going to go through the 10 reasons as I go. I'll give you some resources that you can Google for, so you can dive deeper than I can do for you in 15 minutes. And if you're not sick of crypto by the end of this talk and all the other crypto panels, I have another one for you Tuesday morning at 11 in Marriott 3-4, where you can see me, not a big draw. What you really want to see, though, is Moxie Marlinspike. This is the guy who developed Signal, which is the open source code that actually underlies WhatsApp's encryption. So this is the dude who's basically responsible for over 1 billion people using end-to-end encryption without even realizing it, which I think is kind of awesome, and I think he should be a rock star here. But anyway, let's get to the top 10 reasons to be a crypto absolutist. First off, we already did this, guys. We really already had this fight. We had this fight 20 years ago, back in the 90s, during what we now call the crypto wars, when the Clinton administration was trying to undermine crypto in a couple of different ways. First, there was this thing called the Clipper chip in regard to encrypted phone calls, which was a key escrow scheme where basically the government or some trusted third party would hold onto the keys for all encrypted stuff. And so there was Clipper chip. There were also some schemes regarding the internet. The other thing was the government was trying to restrict the export of strong encryption to keep it out of the hands of unsavory foreign characters and governments. But to make a long story short, by the end of the decade, oh no, is it happening? Okay. By the end of the decade, the administration had surrendered on both fronts in the face of essentially unanimous opposition from the telecom industry, the internet industry, privacy advocates, security researchers, basically everybody, based on many of the same arguments I'm going to run through today about how those policies would undermine digital security, undermine the digital economy, et cetera. And in fact, all of those arguments are stronger now than they were in the 90s. Our digital economy is that much bigger and we rely on it that much more. We rely on its security that much more, and we are facing that many more threats now. And there's that much more encryption all across the world, such that us trying to regulate it is going to be pretty futile. But wait, I'm spoiling some of my later reasons. I'll just say, it's because we've fought this fight before that I get so frustrated when I hear this debate framed, as it was in the talk with the president, privacy versus security, or security versus privacy. In part because when people are scared, privacy is always going to lose. But really, this is a debate not over security versus privacy, but security versus security, and privacy, and free speech, and the digital economy, and human rights of dissidents in China. It's a whole raft of things, several of which I'll talk about right now. So, speaking of security, it's bad for our cybersecurity, undermining encryption, especially when you're dealing with the cyber ninjas, which apparently are one of the big threats, considering how often you see pictures of cyber ninjas who apparently need masks while they're at a computer when they could just stick a piece of tape on their camera. So Comey says, FBI Director Comey says, we want backdoors back, a year ago. Basically, every security researcher and expert ever said that's not possible to do securely. If you want to see a good explanation of why, rather than just hear me say a very vague statement like that, Google for keys under the doormat, and you'll find a great blue ribbon expert panel convened by MIT that explains all the reasons why it's impossible to make a backdoor that only the good guys can ever use. And so Comey says, I want a backdoor. Everybody says, you can't do that. It's impossible to do it securely. And so he's backed off from that, and now he's just saying, well, then don't deploy the encryption. Don't turn on full disk encryption by default. Don't deploy end-to-end encryption. And he's not saying that directly. He's saying it instead by saying this is a business model issue. It's not technically impossible to be secure and give us access. Gmail and Facebook messages do it all the time because those are not end-to-end encrypted. They are encrypted between you and the server. They're stored on some cloud. And he says, well, we're not saying that Gmail and Facebook messages and Twitter DMs are fatally insecure. So why can't everybody just do that? Fewer iMessages and WhatsApps, more Gmails and Facebook iMessages. But actually, they are profoundly less secure. Data stored in the cloud that is not end-to-end encrypted. Just ask anyone who works at Sony, or ask anyone whose nude photo was taken out of iCloud. It is a huge security trade-off when you are not doing that. And we make choices. The companies make choices, and we are given options where our most sensitive data, we can fully encrypt it. And Comey is saying, well, we don't want you to have that choice. If you want to read more about this argument and my problems with it, Google for Bankston encryption passcode opinion. I wrote an opinion piece for passcode about encryption on this issue. But what I'm just really getting at with this cybersecurity thing, this isn't just the companies saying we want to make money. This isn't just the privacy people saying we care about privacy, which what we do. It's pretty much everyone who cares saying this is really bad for security, including serious national security validators like the former head of the Department of Homeland Security, former head of the NSA, former head of the CIA, former White House anti-terrorism czar. Like, people who are not soft on terrorism or crime, who are saying we are better off in terms of our overall security having these tools available. Now, there's a new security issue that's popped up, cybersecurity issue, that's popped up in the Apple case, where what the government wants Apple to do is create a new modified version of their OS that bypasses the security features that make it hard for you to brute force the password on the phone, and then sign it with their secret cryptographic signing key that convinces your iPhone that updates are legitimate software updates from Apple. This is one of the reasons why this Apple case is not just about one phone, because if you undermine the trust in the security update signing process, if the government actually has the legal authority to compel Apple or any other software vendor to sign off and say this security is legit when it's really government-sponsored malware, you are undermining the basic trust in the security ecosystem that ensures all of our stuff is patched. And that's not a good thing. It's bad for our cybersecurity. And you know what? It's also really bad for business. If our government forces our companies to make less secure products, to build in backdoors, to use their signing keys to sign off on government malware, basically pre-hack your phone or your laptop for the FBI and the NSA, how do you think the foreign market is going to react to that? I think they would look for alternatives in the whole wide world of products that aren't made in the US and are not subverted in that way. And I think that a lot of startups and companies that currently are in the US would look to relocate somewhere else where they don't have to deal with a backdoor mandate. Just one example right now, Silent Circle relocated to Switzerland because of worries like this. I just saw a story about a new end-to-end messaging app, Wire, which is based in Switzerland. So there are going to be serious costs if we go down this road. And if you want to learn more about the cost, you can Google for my organization's name, OTI, and surveillance costs, because we wrote a paper about that. But so I mentioned foreign markets and the availability of foreign security tools and end-to-end encryption and device encryption tools. Well, that is one of the reasons why resistance is futile. We could put backdoors into US products and still not prevent bad guys from using encryption. It's freely available all over the place. It's math. Our companies don't have a monopoly on it. In fact, Bruce Schneier, noted security researcher and like Grump for good, he just did a study, a preliminary worldwide survey, and just initially found over 800 separate hardware and software encryption products around the world, 2/3 of which were not from the US, many of which were not just messaging encryption and email encryption, but device encryption as well. Do you not think the bad guys won't just use one of those? In fact, the bad guys are using those. We did a study, Google for OTI CryptoCat is out of the bag. You can guess what we're talking about in it. Where we looked at the end-to-end encrypted messaging applications that ISIS recommends, and 8 of the 9 that it recommends as most secure or secure are open source, meaning that it's like code that's available to anyone to use or to modify or to ship a product with, or was foreign based. So futile. We're just going to hurt ourselves if we do this. Ultimately, whether we like it or not, there's always going to be some data that is out of reach. But that's okay, because whether you're the FBI, the NSA, oh wait, intermission, I found this slide while I was looking for the board, and it gave me an opportunity to just complain. Every year at South by Southwest, it's daylight savings time, catches me by surprise somehow every time, and any mistakes in this talk, I blame on that. But anyway, as I was saying, it's going to be okay. Yes, there's some data we can't get, but whether you are the FBI, the NSA, or Batman, who violated everyone in Gotham's privacy in that damn movie, you're in a golden age of surveillance. You have access, if you're law enforcement or intelligence, to vast amounts of data that you never had before, that were unimaginable even to cops and spies from 10 years ago. Whether it's the vast amounts of metadata about who you were talking to and when and how often, which you can't encrypt, or the location data. The location data we're just leaking everywhere, all the time. Don't even get me started on Internet of Things. I mean, every device in our life is going to be, shedding data. And then, there's all of those unencrypted iCloud backups and our Gmail archives and our Facebook messages and stuff. So, law enforcement's going to be okay. This argument is really well laid out by a gentleman named Peter Swire in a paper called The Golden Age of Surveillance. Google for that. There was also a really great report by another Blue Ribbon expert panel. There are a lot of them, and they're all on the side of encryption. That was convened by Harvard in regard to the government's claims that it is going dark. And the title of the report is "Don't Panic," because we're not really going dark. There's lots and lots of data still out there for us. I also just wanted to highlight, it's really weird to have FBI Director Comey, one, warning of this dystopian world where everything's going to be encrypted, while in the same breath saying, hey, look, Google and Facebook, et cetera, are not encrypting for business reasons. Why can't you be like them? Basically conceding that there are always going to be a lot of unencrypted services that they will be able to get data from, and kind of just contradicting himself. But I digress. So it's not necessary for us to enforce the law to have a backdoor mandate because of all this other data. It is necessary for us to deploy strong encryption, especially on our cell phones, to help prevent crime, including cell phone theft, in which we are in the midst of an epidemic. And having encrypted phones protects us, both by protecting our data when it's stolen, but also lessening the incentive for stealing our phone, because if it's encrypted, they can't flash it and resell it in China. And so you can Google for a piece that I wrote on this called for Slate, Bankston, smartphone encryption. But basically laying out all the numbers on smartphone theft and wondering why law enforcement never factors that in when it's talking about this sort of balance between law enforcement and privacy rather than security. Another problem that bugs me is the way they use the Fourth Amendment in their arguments. The Fourth Amendment protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. Warrants typically will make a search reasonable if they are particularized and based on probable cause. But we are now in this world where we have devices like our cell phones that have so much digital data on them that it's actually much more invasive to search our cell phone than it may be to search our home. And that is why, for example, the Supreme Court recently held in a case called Riley v. California, that although the cops can usually search all your stuff when they arrest you, they can't search your cell phone. They have to go get a warrant because it's just fundamentally different. But in the encryption debate, the government basically tries to turn the Fourth Amendment from our right into theirs, saying, well, if we have a warrant, then we should be able to search and seize it, even if practically we can't do that. So basically, because you have a Fourth Amendment right to be limited to warranted searches, when we get a warrant, you have to redesign the world to enable us to serve that warrant. That doesn't make sense. That's not what the Fourth Amendment says. That's not what it's intended, and I think the founders would freak out. In fact, as a former computer crime prosecutor, Mark Zwillinger, put it, he is representing Apple in their case, I don't believe that law enforcement has an absolute right to gain access to every way in which two people may choose to communicate, and I don't think our founding fathers would think so either. The fact that the Constitution offers a process for obtaining a search warrant where there's probable cause is not support for the notion that it should be illegal to make an unbreakable lock. It's never been illegal to create an unbreakable lock, nor have we ever been required to hand our keys over to the government just in case it might need them for investigation. So screw them on that. Free speech. There are a couple of reasons why encryption is important to free speech, or why the fight against encryption implicates our free speech rights. The most obvious and direct is the fact that dissidents around the world, and here for that matter, rely on encryption tools to maintain their anonymity and to associate and communicate privately, especially in regard to protecting themselves from repressive governments. You can Google for a great report by the UN's rapporteur on free expression, David Kaye, which talks about this at length. Just Google for David Kaye encryption report. But you know, encryption is so important to human rights around the globe that many of the tools we now use for encryption were funded by the United States for use in repressive regimes, or by intelligence. So Tor, which relies on encryption, was funded by Naval Research. The Signal software, the code under Signal, coded by Moxie, who I mentioned earlier, was in a great deal funded by the State Department. The State Department, in fact, has a wide raft of internet freedom initiatives targeted at funding strong encryption-based tools to protect people's ability to communicate in repressive regimes. There's another speech issue, though. Back in the 90s, there were some cases challenging the export rules, saying that code is speech. Code is actually expressive, and the First Amendment protects it. And the courts agreed. That doesn't necessarily mean that any attempt to regulate code is going to be unconstitutional. It means you need to go through a process to evaluate whether it meets the balancing tests that you have to pass when you're trying to regulate speech. But it's relevant. And it's relevant in the Apple case in a new direction. Because what Apple is saying is sort of the reverse of what happened in the 90s, where they were saying you can't publish this code. The government is saying you have to write this code. The government is trying to compel Apple to engage in a speech act, which is something that is questionable on the First Amendment. And especially questionable under First Amendment is the government's attempt to force Apple to sign this software and attest that the government malware that it's coding is actually legitimate Apple software. So that is a very novel and important First Amendment issue that we're going to have to look at, and with serious implications, as I said, for the overall security of the digital ecosystem, because if the signatures can be subverted, any device or software can be subverted. Excuse me. But getting back to, you know, dissidents using crypto to evade repressive governments, if we undermine encryption here in the US, other governments are going to do it too. And we are already facing threats in China and Russia on this score. Other countries that are more moderate are doing some not great things here. India is looking at a bad law. Brazil just threw a Facebook employee in jail because WhatsApp couldn't comply with a wiretap order because of its encryption. And in fact, even close friends like UK and France are looking at laws that would mandate backdoors. Internet freedom begins at home. We need to set the example for the rest of the world. And right now, we're not setting a very good one. Except to the extent that Congress has looked at and spoke to this issue to some extent and rejected the idea. Not just in the crypto wars of the 90s, but as recently as the past couple of years, the House of Representatives in particular considered several appropriations amendments that basically said, hey, government, you can't spend money to try and make someone redesign their product to be less secure. And nearly 300 representatives voted for those amendments. So very, very strong opposition in the House of Representatives to the idea of any kind of backdoor mandate. There is some trouble brewing in the Senate. Senators Feinstein and Burr have been, for the past several months, saying they're going to come out with some bill that would have some sort of mandate in it. I'm eager for them to release it so we can tear it apart, but so far it hasn't come out yet. Meanwhile, there are a lot of bills to protect encryption that are floating around Congress with names like the Secure Data Act or the Encrypt Act. And so I'm feeling pretty good about where we stand in Congress. But even if I'm wrong and something bad starts moving in Congress, well, we are gonna SOPA the hell out of it. If you think that the Stop Online Piracy Act of 2012 united the internet community and the tech companies and internet users and young and old, et cetera, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is somewhat emblematized, that was a weird choice of words, through the breadth of the coalition that has already addressed the White House on this issue. If you Google for OTI encryption letter, you will find a letter signed by basically every privacy and free speech and human rights group, every internet company, and like every major security researcher saying, please don't undermine encryption. And I will take some credit. I think that letter had a lot to do with the White House's position that it won't seek legislation. And you can also look at the breadth of the amici, or friends of the court, who filed briefs in the Apple case. There were 22 briefs in the Apple case from across the spectrum, from like all the companies, users, nonprofit organizations, even some representatives of some of the victims supporting Apple in this case. Indeed, there were more friend of the court briefs filed in this lower court case than in any lower court case ever, which just goes to show the breadth of the coalition that would push back if something started moving in Congress. But like with SOPA, we need the startup community's support in the fight. And that's really my final message to you guys here at South by Southwest. We need startups in the fight. We need you to talk to your policymakers. We need you to keep making more secure products because customers want them. I actually just saw a great talk the other day about the move to the dark social and the like more private tools, because people are getting tired of just posting stuff willy-nilly and they want more privacy. And you know, the foreign market wants more privacy against state actors as well, including the NSA. And you know, you can take yourself out of the surveillance loop if you make your product secure enough. Apple thought their product was secure enough. They are now going back to the drawing board to make sure that next time the government tries to force them to do something like this, they simply won't be able to. And in the design of your product, you can do the same thing. Hardening your products with encryption is good for business, it's good for your users, it's good for our security, it's good for our rights, it's good for our economy. So join us. Be awesome. You rock. Be a crypto absolutist, and the future will thank you. Thank you. So I believe I am supposed to allow for questions at this point if anyone wants to ask questions, and I see that gentleman has one right there.
Hi there. This is working great. So what do you feel about McAfee's offer to do a one-time thing for the government and be like, hey, it's a private solution, we'll do this for you?
Everything I've, so the question was, did people hear the question? Everyone that has looked at that has said it's not a credible offer, he can't actually do what he's talking about, and he's crazy. So
that's your answer, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think really only Apple is in a position to do this because of the signing key issue. Anyone else?
I got a question. President Obama said something to the effect of, well, you wouldn't want Swiss bank accounts in everyone's pocket. Can you deconstruct that analogy a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, first off, having a Swiss bank account is legal. So, I don't know. I mean, what I will say, you know, he's trying to say, do we really want everyone to have some sort of impenetrable privacy? And my answer to that is, before the digital era, we all had impenetrable privacy in a lot of respects. We had private conversations with no prospect of anyone planting a secret microphone where we were having it. Most of our communications, were face-to-face rather than over a phone that could be tapped or over a device that could be tapped. We could send letters to each other and then destroy the letters rather than having them sit in a database for a decade and then have them be seized. So, if anything, the ability to communicate privately with the government having no chance of access at all has been the status quo for most of humanity. And it's actually the idea that the government should have access to every bit of human communication that's the novel idea. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of South by.